We're now on to our sixth study or sixth talk on the Cappadocian Fathers, and we're going back to Basil and some of the things that he wrote. I've chosen two of the books that he wrote, or two of the types of work that he wrote for us to look at today. And the first one is on what's called social justice. Social justice. And I'm going to quote a number of things from this book here, and I think you kind of get it. You can get this from the SVS Press, the Popular Patristic Press, which is based in New York. As I've said earlier, Basil came from a wealthy family. He was part of the elite of the Roman province of Cappadocia. His father was a lawyer and a teacher of rhetoric, and the family owned extensive estates around Anissa in the Pontus area close to the Black Sea. Basil already made his mark by 359 in defending Nicaea at the Synod at Constantinople. And then we heard that he was made bishop in 370 AD. It was around this time that a catastrophe, a terrible disaster, struck the whole area of his region in Cappadocia. In 369 there was a major earthquake. Not only that, where many buildings had been destroyed, I'm sure, but also there was a famine. There was no rain. And the result was real desolation in the area of Cappadocia, just at the time when Basil was made bishop. We've already heard how, although he had an inheritance, he came from a wealthy family, he sold much of that in order to establish this hospice, this basiliados in the center or near the outskirts of Caesarea, to care for the sick and the needy and the hungry. We're told that rivers dried up, crops failed, and acute shortages of food became common. And it was in this context that Basil preached 4 sermons that we have here in this book about social justice, principally aimed to those people who had a lot materially, making them think about their responsibility towards those who had much less. These 4 sermons are titled as follows: To the Rich. The second one, I will tear down my barns. The third one, in time of drought and famine. And then the last one, against those who lend at interest. To be honest, they're all familiar themes, not only then, but also for us today, as we face many situations in our own countries and around the world where people have so little, whereas some of us, like from the UK, have comparatively so much. To the Rich was a sermon based on the story of the rich young ruler in Matthew chapter 19, verses 16 to 22, and Luke 10, verses 25 following. To the rich, Basil lays down the principle of sufficiency. Instead of looking for innumerable ways of spending wealth for pleasure, rather, he says, be satisfied with enough. So 1 cloak is sufficient, he says. That's quite a challenge to a rich person. Bread for the stomach is sufficient. There is no need for great delicacies, and that again would be a great challenge to those people who are rich. True glory, he says, is seeking God's kingdom. And Basil brings home the extravagance of a wealthy lifestyle. He's vivid in the way that he preaches. He says, and I quote, they wear bridles and belts all of silver and gold. They are adorned with blankets of finest purple, arrayed like a bridegroom, and they go around in this style, whereas so many people around them have absolutely nothing. He says, when you have opportunity to exchange corruptible things for the kingdom of heaven, you shed tears. Why? Spurning the one who asks of you, and refusing to give anything, while contriving a million excuses for your own expenditures. And we ask ourselves, how much over what is now 1800 years has the world changed since those days. His second talk was entitled, I Will Tear Down My Barns, Luke 12:16-21, based on the parable that Jesus told of the rich man who built larger barns because he had greater produce rather than sharing what he had with others. He talks here about two challenges, two temptations that we all face. Either the temptation of afflictions, which is what Job had, if you remember in the story of Job, or the temptation of the prosperity of life. This story deals with the latter. Despair is the temptation of afflictions, arrogance the temptation of prosperity. He says, you say to yourself, I will pull down my barns and build larger ones. But if you fill these larger ones, what will you do next? Will you tear them down again, only to build them once again? What could be more ridiculous than this? Incessant toil, labouring to build and then labouring to tear them down again. And here is, if you like, his crunch point. If you want storehouses, you have them in the stomachs of the poor. Why are you wealthy and some poor? Why else? But so that you might receive the reward of benevolence and faithful stewardship, while the poor are honoured for patient endurance in their struggles. Is not the person who strips another of clothing really called a thief? And so he goes on in another of these four talks, the next one in time of famine and drought. He speaks of there being great distress in the lands. Farmers weep, infants cry out for milk, mothers cannot breastfeed their babies. Basil implores God, but the seeds of his words do not necessarily germinate, bring fruit. Basil seeks an explanation. We've turned away from the Lord and disregarded his ways. And so he goes on in the same manner, saying to the wealthy that out of their wealth they should share from their sufficiency with others who have so little. Redistribute your surplus to the needy. Hunger is the most terrible of afflictions, driving people to extremity of action, even cannibalism and eating your own children, as is found in the book of Lamentations. And the last of his four talks is called Against Those Who Lend at Interest. He simply says, do not do it. Do not lend your money at interest. Do not charge your brother or the poor person a sum in order to have what you have a great deal of. And if you are in the position of needing interest, he says, do not be lured into debt. The joy of receiving a payment is swiftly followed by the anxiety of repayment, and terror seizes the debtor's soul. So what I want to say is that these are powerful talks, all four of them. They show Basil's concern for social justice, which is so much part of his ministry as the bishop of Caesarea. And what he did was to exemplify his teaching in sharing his legacy and inheritance with those who were poor. It was a powerful witness and testimony. Thank you. Shukran.